Hi, my name is Claire Whitner. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and the James A. Welu Curator of European Art. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about our Rembrandt Etchings exhibition. We have borrowed this extraordinary collection from the Boijmans Van Beuningen Museum in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And one of my favorite sections in this exhibition deals with Rembrandt and inspiration, and specifically looks at some of the source material for his prints. What I think is really interesting is you get a sense of Rembrandt as a person, how he saw himself as an artist, and the way in which he tried to place himself in the continuum of art history. And one of the exciting examples is Rembrandt's print for Christ driving the money changers from the temple. And what you see very clearly in this etching is that he's borrowing the figure of Jesus with the whip from an earlier print, woodcut, specifically by Albrecht Dürer, who was really the great printmaker of the late 15th, early 16th century. And for Rembrandt would have been this incredible figure, a figure that loomed very large in the history of printmaking. What Durer is doing is working in woodcut, a very different kind of medium, a much less yielding medium than etching. And in particular, you see how the figure's head is sort of bent here into the arm, this very sort of clear form with the whip over the head. And you see this again in Rembrandt. You know, the whip is up over the head, the arm comes around, and you see that it's in reverse. We know that Rembrandt collected prints, and so it's very likely that he had this print by Dürer in his collection and was specifically looking at it when he created the drawing for this etching, because we know that if he was looking at this figure and copying it, the image would have been reversed when it was printed. As you see here, this is the mirror image. But in Rembrandt's print, he's actually built the scene out much more than in Dürer's print. You can see here in Dürer, we just see one of the figures sort of lying at Jesus's feet. You see some figures in the background. Rembrandt used a landscape format, and you get a much denser space, and you get a sense of how far the temple retreats into the background. Also, both artists are playing with light. If you look in the top corner here, you have Dürer attempting to show how candlelight impacts the wall in the background. So he's left some area in reserve. So you get this real pinpointed light source. In the etching, Rembrandt has these lamps that hang from the ceiling, and you get similar, this sort of entirely white area in the background that gives you a sense of the different light sources entering the temple. You know, a very different kind of technique with etching, because you're working in an intaglio method. The image is being bitten into the copper plate, whereas here in a woodcut, it's showing you the relief of what's being carved into the wood block. So a very different technique, but you see Rembrandt trying to achieve some of these similar effects, but also, much like Rembrandt, trying to do this in a manner that goes above and beyond his predecessors. You know, it's a more complicated work, and he's taking this figure of Dürer, who he holds high in esteem, but showing that he can go toe-to-toe with an artist like Dürer, who in his time would have been revered as one of the true greats. So insofar as Rembrandt was very aware of his predecessors, his forebearers, you know, people who had come before him as these real greats in printmaking, he was also acutely aware of the great artists of his own time. And Rembrandt, working in the 17th century Netherlands, knew that Peter Paul Rubens from Antwerp was an artist that loomed very large in his time. You know, Rubens was working on large altarpieces for Catholic cathedrals, and he worked all around Europe in different courts, both in Protestant courts in England, but also in Spain. So Rubens was a person who not only had an incredible practice, a large workshop, but he was internationally known. Rembrandt, on the other hand, who built up a reputation for himself, never left the northern Netherlands. You know, he was living and working in a Protestant region, and was not creating these large altarpieces that would go in these places of worship. And what you can see here in his print of the Descent from the Cross is that he was aware of Rubens's very large-scale altarpiece from the Antwerp Cathedral of the Descent from the Cross, which he would have known through prints. And what you see in the Rubens print is really the embodiment of the aesthetic of Baroque, of a Flemish Baroque artist. The bodies are idealized. These images are meant to evoke emotion in the viewer. You see extreme sort of mourning, when you look at the Christ Mother with Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, all of these figures, but their bodies are created and described in these extraordinary idealized forms. I mean, if you look at the musculature of Jesus's body, it is sort of beyond the human. Whereas you look to Rembrandt, who's clearly aware of Rubens's composition. We have the central cross, the way the figure is being brought down from the cross. And yet, Christ's form here, Jesus's form, is not idealized. I think what is so striking to my eye is this, sort of sagging flesh, that you get a real sense of his mortality in this moment, his human form. With each of the figures, you see their faces feel very specific. They feel portrait-like. These are not idealized faces. And it adds this sort of injection of humanity into Rembrandt's composition. I think again, you see the reversal of the forms. You can tell that he was looking at the print and then it gets reversed in the printing process of the etching. I think what's also interesting is, in Rembrandt's work, both in his paintings and his prints, he pays a lot of attention to facial expressions, to different types of faces, which in 17th century Dutch art are called tronies. And they're not portraits, but really more types of faces. People express, he did this even with his self-portraits. And here you see how that kind of work in the tronies is all brought together in a sort of masterful constellation of emotions. So I think what you see Rembrandt doing here again is sort of acknowledging the people who are truly influential in his time, both sort of in the previous century, but very much in contemporary art. And Rembrandt positing that he is on par with these artists and that he's also doing something different, something special, something unique. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you at the Worcester Art Museum. Rembrandt, Etchings from the Museum Boijmans Van Beuningen will be on view through February 19th.